Okay, you're watching One on One, and I'm Zan Azli. Our guest today is lawyer Syahredzan Johan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we're going to cut straight to it.
Right.
Right now, hot in the news, the Sedition Act.
Right.
Every time somebody, it's been around in Malaysia for some time now, a few decades, too long, and whenever somebody gets detained or questioned or probed under this Sedition Act, it makes headlines,
Yes.
Provocative headlines, controversies, and all that. And we all know that you are the chair for the Bar Council's National Young Lawyers Committee, which is going on a campaign, Mansuh Akta Hasutan,
Yes.
Abolish the Sedition Act. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it is actually a coincidence that we launched the campaign at this point in time. It is not actually in response to the current sedition, quote-unquote, dragnet. It has actually been in the works for quite some time, because the bar has always taken a position that the Sedition Act should be repealed. We just took the opportunity because of the the spotlight on the Sedition Act, because of the recent arrests, and also because of the government's pledge to repeal it, to launch the campaign and to start off things at this point in time. But the planning for it has actually gone ahead for quite some time already.
Okay.
Yeah, and the campaign is basically, it's supposed to be a year-long campaign, a nationwide year-long campaign. And some of the things that we want to do, and we have actually done, is actually to create awareness to people on why is it that we need to repeal the Sedition Act. And that would mean that we have to go throughout Malaysia, nationwide, to give this so-called awareness, either by way of talks or by way of workshops. At the same time, we also want to collect signatures nationwide, and we hope that after a year, we can present these signatures to the government. If the Sedition Act is not repealed yet at that point in time, we are going to present the signatures to the government and tell the government that, look, we actually have this a number of persons in Malaysia who want the Sedition Act to be repealed.
Okay. Why do you think the Sedition Act has to be repealed?
Okay, I want to make this clear. We are not saying that freedom of speech should be unrestrained.
Right.
No one is saying that, right? I think everyone can agree that freedom of speech is something that there are limits to it. But we are saying that that limit should not be the limits that are imposed in the Sedition Act. Because the limits imposed in the Sedition Act is far too low. The threshold is far too low. And it allows for the authorities to basically determine what can and cannot be said. And surely in a democratic nation such as ours, this is something that is undesirable. This is something that is anti-democratic, where the authorities can actually determine what the discourse that is going on. And the reason why that can be, the authorities can take such an action is because of the fact that the way the Act is drafted is far too vague and allows for arbitrary use. So that's why we are against the Sedition Act. So the question is, therefore, if you don't have the Sedition Act, what about those who incite hatred, for example? Well, number one, current laws under the Penal Code are sufficient to deal with this situation. But even if we feel that, okay, they are not sufficient, we can always enact new laws, which puts the threshold at a far higher level, allows or strikes the balance between freedom of speech and the need to maintain harmony.
Right. I recently interviewed YB, Khairi Jamaluddin, and we talked about this, and he said something about Malaysia having to have a societal censorship, where the society themselves, regulates what is being said. So there's no law that's required.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I completely agree, because I think laws are not the solution to everything. Unfortunately, a lot of us think that legislation is that magic wand which can solve all of our problems, but it is not. Sometimes it is actually legislation that creates the problem. So far more important is, I think, awareness, maturity, responsibility, things like that. These are the things that we should push. And if you want to maintain harmony, if you want to make people respect each other, it cannot be by way of law. Because law would also, if, for example, if someone is a racist, you know, you have law, he might not express it, but he's still a racist, you know. But if we then allow him to say what he wants to say, and we engage with him and say that, look, why do you think this way? Why do you have such prejudices? At the very least, we can try to show him the other side of the coin, you know, instead of just him, you know, going back to his enclave and talking amongst his friends and still being racist, and we don't know. So on top of our society, we have this shiny veneer of harmony, but underneath, you'll see a lot of discontent, bigotry, and so on and so forth.
So I guess that's where discourse comes in. It plays a role, right?
Indeed.
Now, in the last few months, we've seen people being, detained, questioned. Journalists have been called up. Lawyers have been called up, and academics. You know, we've had Associate Professor Azmi Sharul from University of Malaya. Recently, Professor Aziz Bari, and people on Twitter as well. You defended Effie Nazril Saharuddin as well, right? What is worrying maybe to a lot of people in Malaysia is that even academics are being called up now. Do you think, what are your thoughts on that?
I think this is the reason why we should be concerned with the Sedition Act. You know that oft-quoted poem by Martin Niemöller, the one where he says that at first they go after these people, you know, at the end of the day, after the poem ends, it ends by saying that then they came after me and there was no one else to speak for me, you know. So it's the same thing. They will come for, you know, first it'll be academics and politicians and activists. But one day, if the act is used against normal Malaysians, and it has been used against normal Malaysians, but you and me, people who are not so-called controversial figures, you know, not public figures. If it is used against me and you, and there's no one who wants to speak up for people such as us, because everyone else has been detained or charged or whatever, then I think that's where the problem lies. So it is a worrying trend, and that's why we say that we need to be concerned with the Sedition Act. We need to tell people out there that this is what can happen. If they can go after academics, it won't stop them from going after everyday Joes.
Okay, now let's move on. Recently, we had a big fiasco with the Selangor Menteri Besar issue. It went on for a few months, and it was a debate in the media, in the public sphere, a very legal debate, right? What are your thoughts? Everything is settled down now. You know, we have a Menteri Besar now. Selangor has a Menteri Besar. The Sultan of Selangor played a big role in this, and it has settled. What are your thoughts on this, on the process of state administration, I guess?
Yeah, I think what is good, I mean, if you can look at the silver lining in this whole fiasco, you know, it's very easy to be what do you call that? To lose hope, to lose confidence in politics and how things are being run because of this fiasco. But I'd like to look at it from another point of view. You look at this whole fiasco, and as you have pointed out, there are legal debates that have come up from the whole fiasco. Starting from how do you remove a Menteri Besar? How do you determine confidence? You know, can you do it in the assembly, or can you do it by way of statutory declarations? Thereafter, how do you determine whether another person has a command of the confidence, confidence of the command the confidence of the majority? And thereafter, how do you appoint a Menteri Besar? So all these issues before this fiasco happened are not really issues which are being discussed in the open, and people really don't care. But because of this issue, people have gone back or gone to the books actually to look at where the position of the law is, and there's a lot more awareness as to the role of the government, the role of the Menteri Besar, the role of the Exco, the role of the Sultan, and all that. You know, so whatever it is, I think this has actually given Malaysia a good lesson in administrative and constitutional law.
A good lesson.
A good lesson.
Positive, negative lesson?
Lessons, to me, all lessons are good.
Right,
you know?
okay. I want to talk about your activism background right now. I remember a few years ago, I was covering the Lawyers' Walk for Freedom towards Parliament. Before the walk, people came up to give speeches,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And then I saw someone
Yeah.
walking up
Yeah.
at the Lake Gardens,
Yeah.
and he started speaking.
Yeah.
And the way he spoke reminded me a lot about someone I know, you know, someone in the media industry, you know, Datuk Johan Jaafar. And then, hey, you introduced yourself. You said you're Syahredzan Johan, and I remember the words that you said, not the exact words. I'm paraphrasing here, but you said that before this, you felt that you were a bit apprehensive in taking a stand and coming up and voicing out opinions and voicing out your expression and all that, because you were a little bit afraid. But at that point, you said, no, this is a time when I have to be brave, I have to come up, I have to speak. And probably, you know, maybe that was the start of your activism, or maybe it was before that. Maybe tell us a little bit how your background in activism came about.
Well, actually, like a lot of young people at that time, I think there was a lot of, sentiments or a lot of perhaps discontent about how certain things in the country are being run, for example. You know, I think this is quite normal for young people. If I was to pinpoint an exact date, exact time, it would probably be sometime in 2009. If you remember, 5 lawyers were arrested in front of Brickfields police station.
Right.
And one of the lawyers then is my friend. And it was, I think, at that point in time in which I decided that, look, you know, the time for just talking in coffee shops, the time for just grumbling in coffee shops and, you know, talking about how the country should do this or should do that or how we should do something about the country is over. It's time to actually walk the talk. So that's why I decided, look, I don't know what is going to happen, but I have to be at least show some solidarity with my friend at that particular point in time outside of Brickfields police station. I didn't know what was going to be there, who's going to be there, or what's going to happen. I just decided, okay, I need to be there. So that's where I think I can pinpoint my so-called activism started, you know. And from then on, I think I have been given a lot of opportunities, especially through the Malaysian bar. A lot of my activism is through the Malaysian bar. I think you might have heard about the My Constitution campaign. I do a lot of work with the My Constitution campaign. And thereafter, other areas, you know, concerning public interest matters, concerning constitutional law, concerning human rights, I have been involved in. And I suppose I have not looked back from there. But I think the difficulty is with taking that first few steps, because it's difficult, I know. As you mentioned, I myself was afraid, you know. You don't know what's going to happen, you know. We've always labored under the impression that you might, if you're too involved with these kind of things, you might get in trouble with the law and things like that. But I think once you have taken that crucial few steps and you just jump into it, I think after that it's much easier. And what should keep you going is your belief in that whatever you do it because you want a better Malaysia. I think that will actually motivate you to keep doing what you're doing.
And it's not an easy thing being involved in activism, you know, in Malaysia. I mean, there's always challenges, right? What kind of challenges have you faced? And I don't know, maybe family members, they support you?
Yeah. They, my parents support me. My wife supports me. You know, they are actually so-called cool with what I'm doing. And really, I think without their support, I wouldn't be able to do it as passionately as I would right now, because you know you need support systems, and of course my friends as well have been a good support system. So all this contributed to whatever work that I'm doing. The challenges, I suppose, is the challenge of making sure that people understand what you're saying and not being labelled as something or the other. Because there is a tendency in Malaysia that people label other people as certain things. You know, they can be labelled. You do something and then you can be labelled as pro-opposition or anti-government or liberal or, you know, in extreme cases, pengkhianat to your race, for example. So these kind of things do happen, and I have personally faced some of these challenges. And I suppose it can actually affect you if you think about it too much. You know, so I think the best way to deal with these challenges is to know that whatever is it that you're doing with a clear conscience, and you're doing it, as I mentioned, for a better Malaysia. And I think that will actually allow you to go forth and to just ignore these haters, so to speak.
There is a, you know, in Malaysia, the perception of activism isn't necessarily non-partisan.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there is that perception, you know, that in Malaysia, when you are active in certain issues, especially if the issue has a political dimension to it, you are one way or the other, you know, in terms of the political spectrum. But I think we need to realize that civil society in Malaysia is occupying a big and important space. And if we only look at things with political you know, with politically, meaning we look at things as you know, in a partisan manner, as, you know, one group only talking about a certain coming from a certain partisan view, then I think we would actually lose out on the nuance of the different civil society groups. And as a government, I'm just talking from the point of view from the government, I think the government themselves would actually lose out if they cast everyone who criticize them as having partisan interests, because that's not true. You know, for example, the bar, we criticize the government, but at the same time, we will also, commend the government when the government does good. Only thing is, unfortunately, people only remember the times when we criticize the government. So if, in that situation, if the government sees the bar just as a so-called political entity with partisan leanings, which we are not, then it would mean that they don't want to work with the bar. And that would also mean that both parties would lose out. So I think for a better checks and balance to happen, for civil society to play its role, I think the government should look at civil society groups in a more neutral manner.
In the things that you do, right, I think a lot of people, you're active in social media, and because of what you do, of your activism and, you know, your outspokenness, a lot of people follow you. How important is social media, like Twitter, for example, for you?
It's, well, personally for me, I have actually gone offline from Twitter for about 4 weeks just to see how it'll work out. And I must say I do miss it, you know, because putting aside, you know, there's a lot of, you have to sift through a lot of non-important stuff, let's say, yeah. But it is a crucial tool, it is an important tool for an activist, because with just one click, you can spread your message to people out there, you know, and with retweets and all that, it will go out to more and more people. And what is important also with social media, and I think this is important for nation building, is that social media has actually allowed Malaysians to connect with each other in ways which we can only imagine just a few years ago. A person in Perlis, for example, can now communicate with someone who is in Kuching, you know, whereas before this they wouldn't have opportunity to even meet, you know. And what I've also noticed is that, of course, again, putting aside a lot of non-important stuff, I call them, on Twitter, real discourse can happen in social media. I give a good example. when the hudud issue came up, you can actually see discourse happening. People who are for hudud and people who are against hudud are now talking to each other. They still at the end of the day might not agree with each other, but at least they know, okay, this is where you are coming from. You are not this extremist who just wants to impose your way of life onto me. Or the other side, this is where you are coming from. You are not just some atheist or some non-Muslim liberal trying to corrupt me, kind of thing. So slowly this meeting point is being developed on social media, and I think it's really great. And for someone who thinks who has a cause, I think social media, there's no rival to it. There's nothing that can replace it.
Okay. It's hard to ignore the fact that your father, Datuk Johan Jaafar, is a very prominent personality in the country's media world, right? Did he have a lot of influence in you and your life? And instead of going to the media, you went into law.
Yeah, he does have a lot of influence, and I think I get a lot of inspiration from what he does. I still remember time when I was growing up, and he would share with me his experiences, because he is someone who has been all over the world, been there, done that. So his anecdotes of his experiences really inspired me as I was growing up. Of course, he did not inspire me to join the media or journalism or anything like that. And the thing is with him, he never dictates what his children wants to do. So if you look at my siblings, for example, there's quite a variety of disciplines in there, and none of us actually have the same disciplines, for example, all 5 of us. But I think what he has instilled in us is this sense of pride in what we do, this sense of integrity, that whatever you do, you must have a certain set of principles. He always tells me that lembu berpegang pada tali dan manusia berpegang pada janji, and I think that's one of the things which I hold dear until now. And even now, whatever I do, I think he supports it and he respects it. Of course, some of my views he might not agree with, but that's the way of life. I mean, that doesn't mean that I stop being his son or he stops being my father. So yeah, what I have before this tried to avoid is to try and avoid people seeing me as just his son. I want to build my own name. But after a while, I've realized that, look, you cannot run away from who you are. So I will continue to do what I do, and I hope that people will see me as my own person instead of the son of Johan Jaafar.
Well, listen, I've followed you. I've known about you. I've listened to you give talks and speeches and all that. And yeah, it has left an impression on you. And I've noticed that whenever you speak, you always insert a poem or pantun in it. And I'm glad in this interview you inserted a poem as well. So I'd like to thank you very much for, I finally get to speak to you.
Thank you so much.
It's very nice.
Yes, it's been
Thank
wonderful.
you for giving us the time, and it's been a pleasure.
Yes, indeed, it has been. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.